I was standing in a quiet hotel hallway, holding a paper cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard, when my stepmother's voice carried through the open doorway of the estate's main hall. "Just take the damaged stuff nobody bids on," she said, like she was doing me a favor. A few people chuckled politely, the kind of sound people make when they want to stay on the right side of whoever's in charge. I didn't react. I just took a slow sip, felt the heat hit my tongue, and let it pass. Then I looked past her shoulder and noticed something small that didn't match the scene. A man in a gray suit was setting down a hard-sided folder on the auctioneer's table. It wasn't an auction catalog. It had a county seal on the corner. I remember thinking, that's going to matter. I didn't say anything. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself. I just stood there in my plain black dress and waited, because silence can do a lot of work if you give it time. And before the afternoon was over, the same people who laughed at that line would stop smiling completely. But not for the reason they expected. The estate sat outside Annapolis, tucked behind a long line of old trees and a stone wall that made the place feel older than it really was. My father loved that wall. He used to tell visitors it had history. It didn't. He had it built 10 years ago. The first thing you saw when you stepped inside was a portrait hung in the entrance hall, positioned like a warning. My father in the center, in hunting clothes he barely used. My brother beside him, already looking like he'd practiced confidence in a mirror. My sister seated off to the right, posture perfect. And me on the far left, slightly faded, like the painter had lost interest. It was accurate in a way my father never noticed. No one in that house ever really looked at me for long. What the portrait didn't show was what happened later. It didn't show the years I spent learning procedures, systems, checklists, and what happens when people assume you're not paying attention. It didn't show the fact that I'd built a career where being calm under pressure wasn't a personality trait. It was the job, and it definitely didn't show the paperwork. A year earlier, my father's financial trouble had finally gotten loud enough that even he couldn't ignore it. I found out the same way I found out most things in my family, not because someone told me directly, but because the truth leaked out around them in pieces. A cousin mentioned a temporary cash issue. A banker I'd met once asked if I was aware of the situation. My brother sent a text that said, "Dad's handling it. Don't worry." So I didn't worry. I verified. I called an attorney I trusted. I asked questions in a careful order. I reviewed records. I didn't rush. I didn't announce anything. I just worked the problem like I'd been trained to. When I was sure, I made an offer through a trust. Private, clean, boring. The kind of transaction that doesn't create a headline. My father signed, got the money that kept him out of court, and continued living there under the same assumption he'd always carried, that the estate was an extension of his identity. He never asked who the trust belonged to. He never pushed. He didn't want details. He wanted the story to stay intact. I let it. Not because I wanted to embarrass him, not because I wanted revenge. I wasn't interested in that. I did it because it was the most stable solution available, and it allowed him to keep his dignity. I also did it because I'd learned something over the years. People reveal a lot when they believe you have no leverage. The call about my father came on a Tuesday morning while I was aboard my ship, sitting at a metal desk under fluorescent light, reviewing a schedule that had too many moving parts. My phone buzzed with a number I recognized. My stepmother's voice was sharp and controlled, like she was reading from a script she'd written for herself. "Claire, it's Marisol." Marisol had married my father 7 years after my mother died. She had a talent for rearranging a room the moment she entered it, not with furniture, but with attention. She always placed herself in the center, even when it wasn't her story. "What's going on?" I asked. "Your father passed away last night," she said. "Heart attack. It was sudden." I sat back slowly. I remember the chair creaking and how loud that sound felt in my small office. "I understand," I said. "The funeral is Saturday. The service will be at the church in town." She paused, then added, "I assume you can arrange leave?" "I will. Good, she said, like she was checking something off. We'll need to discuss the estate. There's a lot to sort through. Her tone suggested that she meant she would sort, and the rest of us would be assigned roles. I said, okay, and let her hang up first. Then I put the phone face down. For a minute, I just sat there, looking at a smudge on the desk that wouldn't wipe off. I didn't feel dramatic grief, not the kind people expect. My relationship with my father had always been distant, polished, and measured. The kind of distance you can decorate and call fine if you never talk about it too long. I thought about a conversation from years ago, when I'd come home in uniform after a promotion. He'd smiled politely, then asked me what I actually did. I'd explained it in plain language. I led people. I managed operations. I was responsible for decisions that affected lives and equipment and outcomes. He nodded the way people nod when they're listening to a weather report. Then he asked about my brother's newest property investment. It wasn't cruelty, it was limitation. And limitation can be predictable if you learn it. The funeral was exactly what I expected. Soft lighting, perfect flowers, a parking lot full of expensive cars. My brother Graham arrived in a black SUV that still had the dealership shine. My sister Elena stepped out of a luxury sedan and adjusted her sunglasses like the cameras might be watching. Marisol moved through the crowd as if she were hosting a charity gala instead of a funeral. She greeted people with a practiced expression, a careful touch on the arm, a steady voice. When she saw me, her face shifted into that particular kind of surprise people wear when they didn't actually expect you to show up. "Oh," she said. "Claire, you made it." "I said I would," I replied. Her eyes flicked down to what I drove. I'd rented a basic car from the airport, something small and quiet. It looked out of place among the polished vehicles in the driveway. Marisol stepped closer and lowered her voice, like she was offering a secret. "We're all staying at the house," she said. "Naturally. But the problem is space." I waited. "Graham and his family have the east wing," she continued. "Elena and her husband are in the guest cottage, and I'll be in the master suite, of course." She touched my arm lightly. Her hand was cool. "There's a very nice hotel about 20 minutes away," she said. "Clean, simple. I'm sure it'll be fine for you." I looked past her, up at the windows of the house, and felt the familiar sensation of being treated like an afterthought in a place full of my childhood memories. I said, "That's fine." Marisol's relief was immediate. She liked compliance. She liked it when things stayed in the shape she preferred. Graham appeared beside her, holding a drink even though it was barely noon. He looked at me the way he always had, like he was doing inventory. "Claire," he said. "Good you could come. How's the Navy thing?" "It's fine," I said. He nodded, then smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Steady government work?" he said. "Not glamorous, but steady." I smiled once, small and neutral. "Yeah," I said. "Steady." I didn't correct him. I didn't list my responsibilities. I didn't explain my rank. I didn't do the thing people beg you to do when they've already decided who you are. I let him keep his version. And as the service began and everyone moved into their seats, I walked in calmly, sat where I was directed, and listened to the pastor describe a man my father had been in public. All the while, in the back of my mind, I kept returning to the county-sealed folder I'd seen earlier at the hotel, and the way it didn't belong in an auction room. Because I knew Marisol. And I knew what came next when she felt cornered. She was going to try to take control of the house. And soon I'd have to decide how much of the truth I was willing to let into the room. Then I waited. The morning after the funeral, I woke up before my alarm. The hotel room was quiet in that way cheap rooms are quiet, like the air itself is trying not to move. The heater clicked on and off. Somewhere down the hall, someone let a door close too hard. I lay still for a minute, staring at the ceiling, then swung my feet onto the carpet and sat there until my thoughts lined up in order. I wasn't going to the estate yet. Not right away. First, I wanted to hear what people said when they thought I wasn't in the room. I showered, dressed simply, and drove over around mid-morning. The estate's driveway curved through trees that were still bare from winter. Gravel crunched under my tires. The house looked the same as it always had. Tall windows, white trim, the kind of place designed to make you feel small unless you belonged. A staff member opened the front door, a woman I recognized from summers long ago, older now, wearing a neutral expression that had learned how to survive in that house. "Morning, ma'am," she said quietly. "Morning," I replied, and stepped inside. The portrait was still there, my father in the center, my brother and sister framed like they were meant to carry him forward, me off to the side, slightly faded. I didn't stop to stare, I just walked past it, like it was a piece of furniture. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and fireplace smoke. Someone had a kettle going in the kitchen. I heard low voices in the sitting room, the soft clink of a spoon on china, Marisol's voice, Elena's, and Graham's, deeper, clipped, already irritated about something. I didn't go in yet. I paused in the hallway, listening without leaning into it, just letting the sound reach me naturally. "I don't understand how this is taking so long," Graham said. "It's not taking long," Marisol replied. "It's just, there are steps, legal steps." Elena made a small sound. "Dad's lawyer said the will reading is tomorrow." "Exactly," Marisol said. "Tomorrow. And after that, we'll know what belongs to whom. Then we can start making decisions." "What decisions?" Graham asked. "The obvious ones," Marisol said. "The estate is expensive, the staff, the upkeep, taxes. Your father kept it afloat because he was him. But we have to be realistic." Elena's voice was softer. "Are you saying we should sell?" "I'm saying," Marisol said carefully, "we should consider all options. But I'm also saying I will not be made unstable because your father passed away. I'm not going to be pushed out of my home." Graham exhaled. "No one's pushing you out." Marisol didn't respond right away. She didn't have to. In that house, silence was also a weapon. She used it like she'd been trained. Then she said, "Claire will understand. She always does. She'll take her little sentimental items and go back to her assignment." The way she said assignment made it sound temporary, like my life was a side job. I waited another beat, then stepped into the room like I hadn't heard anything. Marisol looked up quickly, smile snapping into place. "Claire," she said, warm as sunlight. "There you are." Elena offered a small half-smile. Graham nodded once, distracted. "Coffee?" Marisol asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Just wanted to check in." Marisol patted the arm of the couch beside her like she was inviting me to join the family. I stayed standing. "How was the hotel?" she asked, too casually. "Clean," I said. "Quiet." "Good," she replied. "That's what matters." She wanted to keep me on the outside. She wanted my life to stay smaller than hers, and she wanted me to accept it with gratitude. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I didn't do anything that would feed the kind of conversation she liked. Instead, I asked, "Have you spoken to Mr. Leland yet?" My father's attorney wasn't named Hutchkins. It was Leland, a man who'd been around my father for years and had the careful manners of someone who handled other people's money for a living. Marisol nodded. "Of course. He'll be here tomorrow for the reading." Graham leaned forward. "What did he say about the estate?" Marisol's eyes stayed on me, like she was measuring whether I'd react. "He said it will be handled according to your father's wishes," she answered. "And he also said we should avoid making any decisions until then." Graham scoffed. "That's lawyer talk." "It's procedure," I said quietly. Graham looked at me like he'd forgotten I could speak in complete sentences. Marisol lifted her cup and took a small sip. "Claire always liked procedure," she said. "It suits her." I didn't respond to that. I just nodded once. A neutral motion. Nothing to grab onto. Then I asked, Is the study open? Marisol blinked. The study? I'd like to pick up something personal, I said. One of Mom's books, if it's still there. Marisol's face softened, just slightly. She liked it when I framed my needs as sentimental and harmless. Oh, she said. Yes, of course. Go ahead. I walked out of the sitting room and down the hall toward the study. The floorboards creaked in familiar spots. The house still had the same rhythm it had when I was 15, when I used to move carefully so I wouldn't be told I was stomping. The study door was closed, but not locked. I stepped in and let it shut behind me. The room was darker than the rest of the house, curtains half drawn. The air smelled like old paper and cedar. My father's desk sat where it always had, polished, imposing. On the shelves were the books he wanted people to see, the ones that made him look educated, not necessarily the ones he actually read. I wasn't there for a book. I was there to confirm something. I crossed to the desk and opened the bottom right drawer. It stuck slightly, the way it always had. Inside were folders, neatly stacked, financial statements, letters, documents in that particular shade of off-white that comes from expensive stationery. My father's handwriting was on some of it. Notes in the margins, underlines, a man trying to hold on to control using ink. I didn't touch much. I didn't need to. I was looking for one specific thing, a copy of the agreement. The same agreement he signed a year earlier, the one he never told Marisol about. It wasn't there. That didn't surprise me. My attorney had advised me not to leave anything that could connect the trust to me within the house. But the absence still mattered. It meant my father didn't keep it close. It meant he didn't want to look at it. I closed the drawer gently, then stood there for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the house beyond the door. Voices in another room, a distant laugh, the clink of glass. It all felt like a performance that kept going even after the main actor was gone. I moved to the bookshelf near the window, pulled out an old hardcover that had belonged to my mother, and held it like it was the reason I came. Then I walked back out. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw someone at the far end, near the front entrance. A man in a gray suit, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. He was speaking to one of the staff members, and she nodded, then pointed down the hall toward the main sitting room. He was carrying that same hard-sided folder, the one with the county seal. I stopped walking. My pulse didn't spike. My face didn't change. But I noted it the way I noted everything. That folder meant paperwork. Not grief paperwork, not will paperwork, property paperwork. And the fact that it was here, in this house, before the will reading, told me Marisol had already started making moves. I waited until he disappeared into the sitting room. Then I turned the other way, back toward the quiet part of the house, and took out my phone. I typed one message to my attorney. He's here. Gray suit, county folder. I think she's trying to sell or remove contents before the reading. Then I put the phone face down in my palm and stood still in the hallway, listening to the house settle around me. Because whatever Marisol was trying to do, she was doing it fast, and fast mistakes leave clean trails. I took a slow breath, then walked toward the kitchen, where no one ever watched closely, and poured myself a glass of water. Then I waited. The next morning, the estate felt different. Not louder, not busier, just tighter, like the air had been pulled a little too thin. By 9, the staff had stopped making casual eye contact. Doors closed softly and stayed closed. Someone had extinguished the fire in the main sitting room even though it was cold. The house smelled faintly of coffee and furniture wax, but underneath it was something sharper, like a room that had been cleaned for inspection. Marisol was already dressed when I came downstairs. Dark skirt, pearl earrings, hair pinned back in a style that said control. She stood near the front hall, speaking in low tones to my brother and sister. Graham kept checking his phone. Elena kept smoothing the sleeve of her sweater like she was trying to iron her nerves flat. When Mr. Leland arrived, he didn't enter like a visitor. He entered like someone hired to manage a situation. He shook Marisol's hand first, then nodded to Graham and Elena, then turned to me with a polite, neutral expression. "Ms. Mercer," he said, using my last name from my mother's side, the one I used professionally. I appreciated that. It wasn't personal. It was precise. "Mr. Leland," I replied. He carried a slim briefcase and a folder that looked different from the one I'd seen the day before. This one was leather, worn at the edges, the kind of folder that had held many people's important moments. We gathered in the library, because that was where my father did anything he considered official. The library had tall shelves, heavy curtains, and a table polished so much it reflected your hands when you set them down. It smelled like old paper and citrus polish. Marisol took the chair closest to the head of the table. Graham sat beside her without thinking about it. Elena sat across, chin lifted. There was one chair left, slightly down the line, not central. The placement wasn't accidental. I took the seat without comment. Mr. Leland opened the folder and began with the expected parts: small gifts to friends, donations to local charities, a few personal items. He spoke evenly, never dramatizing. He had the calm of a man who'd watched families unravel in nicer rooms than this one. Then he moved to the larger items. "To my son Graham, I leave my rare book collection and my interest in Crane Development Partners, LLC. Graham's mouth tightened in a satisfied way. Not joy, confirmation. "To my daughter Elena, I leave my art collection and my investment portfolio held with Whitaker and Rowe." Elena exhaled once, slow. Marisol's eyes stayed fixed on the papers, like she could will them to say what she wanted next. Then Mr. Leland lifted his gaze and looked at me. "And to my daughter, Claire?" The room went quiet in that particular way it gets when people expect a punchline. "I leave my military medals from my early service and my navigational instruments." I nodded once. The medals were from a part of my father's life he rarely spoke about. The instruments were decorative in his study. He'd liked the symbolism more than the function. Graham's eyes flicked toward me, almost amused. Marisol's lips curled slightly, not quite a smile. Mr. Leland continued. "As for the estate itself, the residence and grounds are described here as being placed into a life interest arrangement for Mrs. Marisol Crane, allowing her to reside in the home for her lifetime." Marisol's shoulders loosened, not by much, but enough. Graham leaned back, relieved, as if the house had been returned to its rightful orbit. Elena looked at Marisol and forced a small smile, the kind you give when you're trying to keep the peace. Mr. Leland was still speaking, explaining terms, using the careful language of legal limits. I let him finish the sentence, and then I said something small, gentle, and very clear. "I'm sorry, that can't be correct." Everyone turned to look at me. Marisol's expression sharpened immediately. "Excuse me?" I kept my voice even. "The estate can't be placed into a life interest arrangement through the will, not if my father didn't own it at the time of his death." Mr. Leland paused. He didn't look offended. He looked attentive, like a man who'd just been handed a clue. Graham sat forward. "What are you talking about?" Elena blinked. "Claire?" Marisol's voice was colder now. "This is not the time for whatever this is." I opened my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. Plain, no logos, nothing dramatic, just clean paper in a simple binder clip. I slid it across the table toward Mr. Leland. "Deed transfer," I said. "Recorded with the county 13 months ago. The estate was sold to a private trust. My father retained a residency agreement, but ownership transferred fully." Mr. Leland took the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. The room stayed silent while he scanned. I watched his face, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to measure how quickly he processed information. He was good. His eyebrows lifted slightly after the first page. His eyes moved faster after the second. Marisol's breathing changed. Subtle, but I heard it. Graham's foot started tapping. Elena's hands tightened around the edge of her chair. Mr. Leland looked up. "These documents appear properly executed," he said, careful. "Notarized, recorded. If they're authentic, then the estate would not be part of your father's probate assets. It would not be controlled by his will." Marisol's face colored. "No, that's impossible." "It isn't impossible," Mr. Leland said calmly. "It's unusual, but not impossible." Graham looked at me like I'd become a different person mid-sentence. "Elena, do you know anything about this?" he asked, voice rising. Elena shook her head quickly. No, of course not." Marisol turned to Mr. Leland, jaw tight. "Who owns this trust?" Mr. Leland glanced down at the documents again. "The trust is listed as a Delaware entity. It's structured for privacy. The beneficial ownership is not disclosed here." Marisol's voice sharpened. "So we don't know who owns my home?" Mr. Leland kept his tone steady. "We know who owns the property. We just don't know the individual behind the structure. That is the point of this type of trust." Graham stared at the pages like he expected the name to appear if he looked hard enough. "Dad sold the estate," he said, more to himself than to us. Marisol's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "He would have told me." I let a beat pass. Then I said, "Would he have? Or would he have been too proud?" The words landed softly, but they landed. Marisol's mouth opened, then closed. Elena's eyes dropped to the tabletop, like she didn't want to witness the moment. Graham looked at Mr. Leland again. "So, what happens now?" Mr. Leland kept reading, flipping another page. "There's a residency clause. Your father retained the right to remain in the home." Marisol exhaled, relieved for half a second. Then Mr. Leland's finger traced the line further down. "It's specific," he said. "It names only your father." Marisol's relief vanished. "It doesn't extend to spouse?" Mr. Leland shook his head once. "Not as written." Marisol's voice rose. "That's not fair." Mr. Leland didn't react emotionally. "Fairness isn't the standard. The document is." Graham turned toward me, eyes narrowed. "How do you even have this?" I kept my expression neutral. "I asked for the public record. It's filed. Anyone can request it." Graham stared at me harder. "You asked for it." "Why?" I shrugged, small. "Because I like procedure." Marisol's voice went thin. "So what are you saying? That I have no right to be here?" I didn't answer directly. I let Mr. Leland do it, because it mattered more coming from him. "If the trust chooses not to extend residency," he said, "then yes, you would need to vacate under whatever notice period is in your local statutes, unless the trust offers a separate agreement." Marisol's hands trembled slightly. Not much, but enough to show the strain under her polished exterior. "And how," she said, "do I speak to the trust?" Mr. Leland closed the folder halfway. "The trust has representation. I can provide contact information." Marisol's eyes snapped back to me. "You seem to know a lot about this." I met her gaze and kept my voice calm. "I know what's filed. I know what's written. That's all." Graham leaned back slowly, like he'd been punched without being touched. Elena's voice came out quiet. "Dad really sold it." Marisol sat there, still, like her body was trying to decide whether to move or freeze. Mr. Leland began stacking papers. "We will need to adjust the administration of the will accordingly. The estate's property provisions will be irrelevant." Marisol's face tightened again. "Irrelevant." "Yes," Mr. Leland said, "because he did not own the property." The library stayed silent. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed too loud when it ticked. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't lean forward. I didn't claim anything. I let the room absorb what it needed to absorb. Because this was only the first shift. The bigger one was still coming, and it would not happen in this library. It would happen the moment Marisol tried to take something that wasn't hers. After the meeting ended, people stood up in a slow, uncertain way, like they weren't sure what they were allowed to do now. Graham brushed past me without speaking. Elena hovered near the doorway, eyes on the floor. Marisol stayed seated, staring at the papers like she could negotiate with ink. Mr. Leland stepped toward me in the hallway outside the library. His voice dropped, professional but direct. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "I need to ask you something carefully. Do you have any relationship to this trust beyond requesting records?" I looked at him, calm. "No," I said, which was true in the narrow way the word can be true. He held my gaze for a second, then nodded once. "All right," he said. "If you receive any communications about the property, let me know. These situations can turn messy." I gave him a small nod. Then I walked back toward the front hall, where the portrait hung, and stood beneath it for a moment as voices rose faintly upstairs. Somewhere in the house, a door shut hard, and from the second-floor landing, Marisol's voice floated down, sharp and urgent. "Find the appraisal paperwork," she said to someone I couldn't see. "If we move quickly, we can still—" I didn't wait to hear the rest. I stepped outside into the cold air, got into my rental car, and drove back to my hotel. In the parking lot, I sent one more message to my attorney. They're going to try to sell contents or remove items. If they do, what's my cleanest next step? Then I set my phone down, sat still for a moment, and listened to the quiet hum of the engine as it cooled. Then I waited. My attorney called me back within an hour. His voice was calm, the way it always was when he had already sorted the problem into categories. "If she tries to sell contents that transferred with the property," he said, "the cleanest move is a written objection from the trust's counsel. You don't need a fight. You need a record." "Okay," I said. He paused. "Do you want to remain anonymous?" I looked through the windshield at the hotel's blank brick wall. A bird hopped along the curb, unbothered by anything in my life. "For now," I said, "but I'm not going to let her strip the house." "Then follow steps," he replied, like he was handing me a checklist. "Step 1, document what's happening. Step 2, send notice. Step 3, if they proceed anyway, the auction company gets the notice too. Auction companies hate liability." I said, "Send me a template." "I will," he replied. "And Claire, don't go alone into anything messy. Keep it procedural." "I will," I said. After I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. That was the difference between my world and theirs. In my world, emotion didn't change outcomes. Procedure did. I spent the rest of that day quietly organizing. I didn't go back to the estate right away. I stayed at the hotel with my laptop and a legal pad and made a list of what mattered. Step 1. Confirm the transfer language again, word for word. Step 2. Identify what items were included as contents and what items remained personal to my father because I wasn't going to overreach. If something belonged to my father's estate, it belonged to my siblings under the will. That was not the fight. Step 3. Watch what Marisol did next and let her show her hand. The email arrived the next afternoon. It came through as a group message, addressed to all three of us, with Marisol's name in the sender line like a signature. The subject was Estate Transition Plan. No greeting that sounded human, no acknowledgement of grief, just the smooth language of someone who wanted to move quickly while people were still disoriented. She wrote that since the property situation had become complicated, she had arranged an orderly sale of household contents to cover her relocation expenses and reduce burden on the family. She included a date, she included a time, and she included one line that told me she believed she was still in charge. Family members may attend and designate items for first selection prior to the auction. I stared at that sentence for a moment. She wasn't just trying to sell furniture. She was trying to reinforce hierarchy on the way out, to make it look like she was generously allowing us to pick through what she considered ours. I forwarded the email to my attorney without commentary. His response came back fast. It's the auction company you need to stop. If you stop them, she has no engine. Then another message. Do you want me to send notice from the Trust's Council? I typed back one line. Yes, today. I didn't add emotion. I didn't add explanation. I didn't need to. That evening, I requested leave, booked a flight, and kept my plans quiet. I didn't tell Graham or Elena I was going. I didn't ask Marisol for permission. I didn't announce that I'd be present. I just moved. On the day of the auction, the air outside the estate had that pale winter light that makes everything look clean and distant. The kind of light that hides warmth even when the sun is out. Cars lined the circular drive early. Not the family's cars. Different ones. Vans, SUVs with dealer tags, people in practical jackets, carrying measuring tape and clipboards, the kind of buyers who didn't come for memories. They came for inventory. I parked far back near the service entrance, in a spot where staff used to park. The same spot I used when I was 16 and didn't want anyone to see I'd come home late. I sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. I checked my phone. One new message from my attorney, sent that morning. Notice delivered to auction company and to Marisol's counsel. They are now on record. If they proceed, it's willful. I read it twice, then locked the phone and put it away. Then I walked around to the front entrance like I was just another attendee. The main hall had been transformed. Furniture had been pulled forward, tagged with paper labels. Small items were arranged on tables with lot numbers. The air smelled like dust, disturbed from corners that hadn't been touched in years. The auction company had set up a desk near the staircase. A man in a crisp suit stood behind it, checking names, handing out numbered paddles. The same gray-suited man I'd seen earlier moved through the space, speaking quietly into a headset. He looked like a person who avoided surprises. My family had positioned themselves near the front of the hall like they still owned the room. Marisol stood at the center, shoulders back, greeting people with the polite smile she used when she wanted witnesses. Graham stood to her left, scanning items with hungry focus. Elena drifted near a table of framed art, hands clasped, face tight. When Marisol saw me, her smile sharpened. "You came," she said. "I did," I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "This is difficult for all of us, but we have to be practical." "I agree," I said. She looked momentarily satisfied, as if she thought my agreement meant compliance. Graham glanced at me, then at the furniture. "You should pick something," he said, not unkindly, just dismissive. "Before it's all gone." Elena's eyes flicked toward me, then away again. Marisol turned to the auctioneer and lifted her chin. "We're ready," she said. The auctioneer stepped forward and tapped the microphone. His voice carried smoothly across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for coming. Before we begin, we offer family members the customary opportunity for first selection of certain items for direct purchase." Marisol nodded like a queen granting favor. Graham raised his hand quickly. "That desk," he said, pointing toward my father's heavy mahogany desk from the study. "I want the desk." The auctioneer made a note. Elena hesitated, then said, "The 3 landscape paintings. Those." The auctioneer nodded again. Then Marisol turned to me, voice carrying just enough for the nearest people to hear. "Claire," she said sweetly, "you can have whatever is left after the sale. The damaged things nobody wants." A few people nearby smiled awkwardly. It wasn't laughter this time. It was discomfort. Still, she had said what she wanted to say. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I didn't tighten my jaw. I just looked at the tags on the furniture and the way the staff avoided the center of the hall. Then I noticed the auctioneer's table. That hard-sided folder was there again, sitting near his tablet, opened slightly. County seal visible. My attorney's notice. The auctioneer looked at it, then looked up at Marisol, then at me, like he was trying to choose the safest direction. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "before we proceed, there is a matter we need to address." Marisol's smile froze. "What matter?" The auctioneer glanced at the gray-suited man, who gave him a small nod, barely visible. The auctioneer said, "We received a notice this morning regarding ownership of the contents." Marisol's expression hardened. "That's nonsense. The contents are personal effects." The auctioneer didn't argue. He just turned slightly, as if making space for the process to speak. "I need authorization from the property owner," he said, voice even. "Not the resident." Marisol's voice rose. "I am the widow." "And I understand that," he said. "But the notice states the contents transferred with the property in the deed transfer. If that's accurate, then these items cannot be sold without written permission from the trust." Graham stared at Marisol. "What is he talking about?" Elena's face went pale. "Claire." Marisol turned, eyes sharp, and locked onto me. "You did this," she said, quiet and furious. "You're behind this." I didn't raise my voice. "I forwarded your email to my attorney," I said simply. "That's all?" The auctioneer's hands were resting on his tablet, but he didn't touch it. "Without authorization," he said, "we cannot proceed." Marisol stepped forward. "Then call the trust. Get authorization." The gray-suited man spoke for the first time, voice low, professional. "We did," he said. They declined. The hall went very quiet. Even Graham stopped moving. Marisol stood still, like her body had reached the edge of what it could pretend. She looked at the crowd, and I could see her recalculating, trying to decide which version of herself would play best in front of witnesses. Then she said louder, "Who owns the trust?" The auctioneer didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just looked toward Mr. Leland, who had appeared near the side of the room, silent until now. Mr. Leland stepped forward slightly. His face was calm. "The trust's ownership is protected," he said. "That's the structure." Marisol's eyes snapped back to me, and in that moment, I saw it. Not anger, not grief, suspicion. A new kind of attention I had never had from her before. Graham turned toward me too, slowly, like a door opening. "Claire," he said, voice careful, "how did you know to send a notice this morning?" I didn't answer him right away. I let the quiet sit, because I was deciding, in real time, whether I was going to keep this contained or end it cleanly. I looked at the tagged furniture, the portrait above the staircase, the auctioneer standing still with liability written on his face. Then I made my choice. I took one step forward, calm and steady. And I said, "There's something you should understand about the trust." Then I stopped. I let the silence pull everyone closer without me moving another inch. And I waited. I didn't raise my voice when I stepped forward. I didn't need to. The room had already shifted. People could feel it. The auctioneer was standing still behind his table, hands flat on the edge like he was holding the moment in place. Buyers who had been chatting a minute earlier were now quiet, eyes moving between Marisol, my brother, and me. Graham's question hung in the air. "How did you know to send a notice this morning?" I looked at him, then at Elena, then at Marisol. Marisol was trying to hold her posture like armor, but her eyes kept flicking toward the folder on the table, like the paper inside it was a threat she could not talk her way around. I said, "Because I read things carefully." Graham's face tightened. "That's not an answer." "It is," I replied, calm. "It's just not the one you want." Marisol took a half step forward. "Stop doing that," she said, voice low. "Stop talking in circles. If you know something, say it." I nodded once, like I'd heard her, like I was considering whether her tone mattered. Then I turned slightly toward the auctioneer. "What do you need in order to shut this down formally?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard by being treated like the person in charge, which in that moment, he was. I need confirmation from the property owner, he said carefully. Written, or the owner in person. Mr. Leland's gaze moved to me, steady and quiet. Marisol heard it too. In person, she repeated, sharp. Fine. Then bring them here. Who are they? The gray-suited representative kept his voice neutral. Ma'am, we cannot disclose the beneficial owner without authorization. Marisol's control cracked for the first time in a visible way. You cannot disclose? She snapped. This is my home. These are my things. I kept my voice even. They're not. Her head whipped toward me. Excuse me? I didn't debate. I didn't match her intensity. I just stated the next fact. The notice you received is correct, I said. The deed transfer included contents, fixtures, chattels, all of it. The desk, the paintings, the furniture, everything tagged in this room. Graham's eyes widened slightly. So you're saying Dad owned none of this when he died? He owned personal items that were excluded, I said. Clothing, certain documents, a few pieces that were listed separately, but the household contents transferred with the property. That was the agreement. Elena's voice came out thin. Why would Dad do that? I looked at her. Because it was the only way the buyer would take on the full liability of the house without dragging it through months of inventory disputes. It was cleaner. He needed clean. Graham's jaw clenched. And how do you know what the buyer wanted? I let a short pause settle. Then I answered, simple. Because I was involved in the purchase. The room tightened again. A buyer near the staircase shifted his weight like he wanted to disappear. Marisol's eyes narrowed. Involved how? Mr. Leland cleared his throat softly, like he was reminding everyone that this was still a legal environment, even if it felt like a scene. Marisol ignored him. Say it, she demanded. Say what you're implying. I took out my phone, unlocked it, and opened an email thread. Not for drama, just for accuracy. I turned the screen toward the auctioneer first, because he was the one who needed to act. This is confirmation from the Trust's counsel, I said, pointing with my thumb. It includes the deed reference number, recording date, and a statement that no sale is authorized. The auctioneer leaned forward, read it, then nodded once, relieved. Then I turned the phone slightly toward Mr. Leland. He read it too. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened the way they did when something moved from rumor to proof. Marisol's voice rose again. Who owns the trust? Graham stared at me now with a different kind of focus. Not patronizing, not distracted, calculating. Elena looked between us like she was trying to find the last moment when she could have asked a better question. I put my phone away and kept my hands at my sides. I do, I said. No emphasis, no satisfaction, just the truth placed in the center of the room. Marisol froze. Graham let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it died halfway out. Elena's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She swallowed once. That's not possible, Marisol said. Her voice didn't sound confident anymore. It sounded like she needed it to be untrue. It's possible, I replied. It already happened. Graham took a step forward, eyes hard. You own the estate? Yes, I said. He stared at me like he was trying to map my face onto a new category. But you stayed at that hotel, he said. You drive a small car. I never what? I asked, still calm. He didn't answer. He didn't want to say the word out loud. Poor, struggling, behind. Marisol's face flushed red, then went pale. You bought it, she said slowly. You bought it while he was alive, and you let me plan a funeral here. You let me grieve here. You were allowed to be here because my father was allowed to be here, I said. The residency agreement was for him. He died. Everything after that requires a separate agreement. Mr. Leland stepped forward slightly, voice measured. Ms. Mercer, he said. For the record, are you confirming you are the beneficial owner and trustee of the Delaware Trust that holds title to this property? Yes, I said. Marisol snapped. He never told me. I didn't argue with that. I didn't need to. I said, he didn't want to. Graham looked at Mr. Leland. Is that even allowed? Can she do that? Mr. Leland nodded once. It is legal, uncommon in families like this, but legal. Marisol turned toward the auctioneer, still trying to force the world back into the shape she preferred. Then she can authorize the auction, Marisol said quickly. Fine, Claire. Authorize it. We need funds to transition. We need to clear the house. We need to move forward. The auctioneer's eyes moved to me, careful. It was the moment where everyone realized the same thing. This was no longer Marisol's decision. I looked at the tagged items. The desk, the paintings, the chairs that had held my mother's friends during summer dinners, the dining table where my father had taught us, wordlessly, what counted and what didn't. Then I looked back at Marisol. I do not authorize the auction, I said. The words were plain. No edge, no anger, just a boundary. The auctioneer exhaled, almost imperceptibly. Relief. Marisol's expression collapsed into disbelief. You can't, she said. I can, I replied. I just did. Graham's voice got sharper. So what happens now? I answered like I was reading a policy because in a way, I was. Step 1, I said. The auction is canceled. Today. Immediately. No items leave the property through a sale. The auctioneer nodded and began gathering paperwork without being asked. Step 2, I continued. Personal items that belong to my father's estate will be handled through Mr. Leland, according to the will. That includes the specific bequests, books, investments, personal effects, anything clearly excluded from the transfer. Mr. Leland nodded once, approving the clarity. Step 3, I said. Marisol will vacate the property under the notice period already stated by counsel. If she wants additional time, her attorney can request it. If the request is reasonable, it will be considered. Marisol stared at me, breathing faster now. You're evicting me, she said. I'm ending an occupancy agreement that does not include you, I replied. Those are different things. Elena's eyes filled slightly, but she didn't speak. Graham looked sick, like the room had tilted and he didn't know what to grab. Marisol's voice shook. Why would you do this to me? I didn't respond emotionally. I responded factually. Because you attempted to sell property you do not own, I said. And because you would have done it today, in front of strangers, without permission, if no one stopped you. Marisol turned toward the crowd, trying to find sympathy, but people were already stepping back, discomfort spreading through them like a stain. Nobody wanted to be part of a sale that might become a lawsuit. The auctioneer spoke up, professional again. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, raising his voice slightly, we are canceling today's auction due to an ownership dispute. If you registered, our office will refund any deposits immediately. We apologize for the inconvenience. There was a low ripple of movement. People murmured, turned, started filtering out. A few glanced at me with curiosity, but no one asked questions. This kind of wealth drama was entertaining from a distance, not up close. Marisol stayed rooted in place, like she didn't know where to direct her anger now that the audience was leaving. Graham finally found his voice again. All this time, he said, quieter now. You let us talk to you like you needed help. I looked at him. I never asked you for help, I said. You offered pity because it made you comfortable. He flinched as if I'd raised my hand. I hadn't. Elena whispered, Claire, why didn't you tell us? I answered honestly. Because you never asked, I said. Not once. You asked about cars, about who I was dating, about whether I could get leave. You didn't ask what I did, or what it took, or what it paid, or what I wanted. You just decided. Marisol let out a sound, small and broken, then straightened again, trying to regain her shape. "This is humiliating," she said. I nodded once. "Yes." She stared, waiting for me to soften it. I didn't. Mr. Leland stepped slightly closer to Marisol, voice polite and final. "Mrs. Crane," he said, "your counsel has already received formal notice. If you have questions about timeline and belongings, they should go through attorneys." Marisol's eyes flashed. "Of course, hide behind attorneys." I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her that she had used attorneys as a sword the moment it suited her. The auctioneer approached me with a clipboard, careful. "Ma'am," he said, "I need a signature confirming cancellation due to owner refusal for our files." I took the clipboard, read the page, and signed. My name looked simple on the paper, just ink. No rank, no title. Nothing she could argue with. When I handed it back, the auctioneer nodded respectfully and walked away. Behind me, I heard Graham say quietly, "This can't be real." Elena didn't answer him. Marisol's breathing sounded uneven now. She was holding herself together by force. I turned toward the front doors. The hall was already emptying, tags fluttering slightly in the draft as people left. I walked out without rushing. Outside, the air was cold and clean. The gravel under my shoes crunched like it used to when I came home late as a teenager. I reached my car, got in, and sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine right away. Through the windshield, I watched the front door of the estate, waiting to see who would come out first and what version of themselves they would choose next. Then I waited. I didn't stay on the driveway long. The auction crowd cleared out in 10 minutes. The vans and SUVs rolled away one by one. The circular drive returned to silence, just tire marks on gravel and the faint smell of exhaust fading into cold air. Inside the house, the noise would be different now. Not public, private. I drove back to the hotel, checked out, and went straight to meet my attorney in person. Not because it was necessary, but because I wanted the next steps to be clean and documented in a way that couldn't be twisted into something emotional later. His office was in a low, modern building near downtown, all glass and quiet carpet. The receptionist offered me water and didn't ask questions. My attorney, Daniel, met me at the door to his conference room, sleeves rolled up, expression neutral. "You handled it," he said. "I kept it procedural," I replied. He slid a folder across the table. "Here's what happens now, and here's how you keep it from becoming a drawn-out family war." He didn't say it like advice. He said it like a plan. He laid it out the way I preferred to receive information. Step 1 was notice. Already done. Formal, written, time-stamped. Step 2 was inventory. Limited in scope. Not the whole house. Just a clean list of personal property excluded from the deed transfer, the things the will actually governed. Step 3 was access control. Not dramatic, not locks changed in the night. Just clear boundaries about who could remove what and when. Step 4 was a timeline for vacancy, with reasonable flexibility if it kept everyone from spiraling. I asked questions. He answered them. We agreed on the minimal actions required to prevent chaos. Before I left, he said, "One more thing. Mr. Leland called. He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. He said he prefers to do it in a neutral setting." I nodded. That's fine. Neutral settings mattered. They kept people from leaning on familiarity as leverage. The next morning, we met at Mr. Leland's office. He greeted me with the same careful professionalism he had at the estate, as if his job was to keep reality steady while everyone else tried to shake it loose. He didn't sit behind his desk. He sat at a small table instead, signaling that this wasn't a power struggle. It was administration. "I need to confirm a few points for the record," he said. "Go ahead," I replied. He asked the questions in plain sequence. "You are the trustee and beneficial owner of the trust that holds title to the estate." "Yes." "The deed transfer occurred 13 months ago." "Yes." "The transfer included contents and fixtures, with specific exclusions." "Yes." You did not disclose ownership to your father or family. Correct. He paused. May I ask why? I didn't get defensive. I didn't give a speech. Because my father would have refused help, I said. And because anonymity kept it clean. Mr. Leland nodded slowly, as if he could understand it without approving or disapproving. His job wasn't feelings. It was fact. Then the estate is not part of probate, he said. However, your father's will still governs personal assets, accounts, investments, specific bequests, and personal effects excluded from the deed transfer. We'll proceed with that. He slid a document toward me, a list. The list was simple, items clearly personal, the navigation instruments my father left me, the medals, a handful of books with personal inscriptions, a watch, Graham's rare book collection, which had been held separately, Elena's investment portfolio. Some things were messy, a few framed items, a couple of pieces in the study that might have been purchased after the transfer. Those would need verification. I said, I don't want anything that doesn't belong to me. Mr. Leland looked relieved. Thank you. That simplifies this. Then he addressed the problem everyone was about to create if no one controlled it. Your family will want access to the estate to remove personal bequests, he said. I recommend a supervised pickup, one date, one-time window, staff present, a checklist signed by both sides. Agreed, I said. He sat back. And Mrs. Crane's counsel has requested an extension. I wasn't surprised. How long? I asked. 6 months, he said. I kept my face neutral. Daniel had already told me what the notice period was. 90 days was more than reasonable. 6 months wasn't impossible, but it wasn't automatic. I asked one question. Does she have funds to relocate? Mr. Leland hesitated. She claims limited liquidity. That was another way of saying she was used to the house funding her identity. I didn't comment on that. I didn't need to. I'll approve a limited extension, I said. But not 6 months. Mr. Leland looked at me. How long? An additional 90 days, I said. Total of 6 months from the initial notice date, not from today. And it's contingent on a signed occupancy agreement. Clear terms. No removal or sale of contents. No third-party access without written approval. Mr. Leland nodded. That's reasonable. Daniel would draft it. Marisol would either sign or fight. If she fought, the timeline stayed strict. That was the point of having terms. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a moment before driving back to the estate. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it again without the noise. When I arrived, the house was quiet. A few staff cars were parked out back. The front steps were swept clean. It looked like nothing had happened. That was always how wealth worked. It tried to make conflict invisible. Inside, I asked one staff member to open the study. She did, respectfully, and waited outside. I stood alone for a minute and looked at the desk Graham wanted so badly. The surface was smooth. The drawers were closed. It was just a piece of furniture. What made it valuable to him wasn't the wood. It was the idea that it belonged to him by default. I walked through the library, the dining room, the conservatory. I didn't touch anything. I just looked, like an inspector. Upstairs, I heard voices, Marisol's, tight and low, Graham's louder, frustrated, Elena's, quiet, trying to calm them. I didn't go toward the sound. Instead, I went back to the front hall and stood beneath the portrait. In the painting, the version of me in the corner looked like an afterthought, but I noticed something I hadn't noticed when I was younger. That girl wasn't frowning. She was smiling, small, private, like she already knew something. A few minutes later, Graham came down the stairs. He stopped when he saw me. His face looked different now, less certain, less polished. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, not as an accusation this time, more like he was trying to understand a rule he'd missed. I didn't answer emotionally. I answered plainly. Because it didn't change my work, I said, and because it wouldn't have changed how you treated me until you needed something. He flinched slightly. Elena appeared behind him on the stairs, one hand on the banister. Her eyes were tired. She looked like she hadn't slept. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I nodded once. Not forgiveness, not punishment, just acknowledgement. Marisol didn't come down. She stayed upstairs where she could pretend she was still above the room. That afternoon, Daniel emailed the occupancy agreement to Marisol's attorney. The next day, her attorney replied, requesting 6 months again, plus permission to liquidate certain furnishings to cover moving expenses. Daniel forwarded it to me with a short note. "They're still trying." I read it once, then I typed my response. No liquidation, no sale, supervised removal of only personal items excluded from transfer. Signed agreement required for any extension. I didn't add commentary. I didn't justify it. I didn't write a paragraph about fairness. Just terms. 2 days later, her attorney accepted. The agreement was signed. The consequences weren't dramatic. They were inevitable. Marisol had a timeline. Graham and Elena had one scheduled day to pick up will bequests, supervised and documented. The auction company was gone. The tags were removed. The house settled back into stillness. Graham sent me an email that night. It was short. "I don't know how to process this. I thought I knew you. I didn't. I didn't respond." Elena called once. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was quiet, and it sounded real. She said she was sorry for not asking. I listened once, then saved it. Not as leverage, but as proof that people can change when the story they tell themselves finally breaks. A week later, I returned to my ship. Life on board has its own order. Watches, logs, briefings. People who measure you by what you do, not what you inherit. At night, in my small cabin, I opened my laptop and reviewed one final document. A simple timeline, clean and complete. The date my father sold, the date the deed recorded, the date he died, the date Marisol tried to auction off contents, the date the trust issued notice, the date the auction canceled, the date the occupancy agreement was signed. I stared at it for a moment, then closed the laptop. Because the truth was settled now, not by a dramatic confrontation, but by paper, dates, and signatures. And that was always the strongest kind of truth. Then I waited. A few weeks later, I went back on a quiet weekend when the calendar finally left me alone. No meetings, no travel, no phone calls I had to answer immediately. I drove out early before the sun fully warmed the road. The estate looked the same from a distance, but up close it felt different. The gravel was freshly raked. The hedges were trimmed. The windows were clean. The house had stopped holding its breath. A caretaker met me at the door with a small notebook in her hands. She didn't make it personal. She kept it practical. "Mrs. Crane's move-out schedule is on track," she said. "No issues, no strangers in the house, no items removed outside the list." "Thank you," I said. I walked through slowly, not like someone returning to a childhood home, but like someone checking a space after a storm. The dining room was quiet. The table was bare. The library smelled like paper and polish. The conservatory still held the faint outline of where my mother's piano used to sit, even though it had been gone for years. In the front hall, the portrait still hung in its same position. My father at the center, my brother and sister arranged the way he preferred, and me, on the far left, soft around the edges. I stood there longer than I expected to, not because I needed to prove anything to the painting, just because I finally had enough distance to see the whole thing clearly. When you grow up being treated like background, you can spend years trying to step into the center, or you can stop asking for space and build your own structure somewhere else. I had done the second one, quietly, over time, without asking permission. I went into the kitchen and found a mug in the cabinet, one of the plain ones the staff used. I filled the kettle, waited for it to heat, and made tea. The sound of the kettle and the steady click of the thermostat felt ordinary in the best way. I carried the mug to the small breakfast table and sat down. No one interrupted. No one watched. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like a place, not a performance. Later that afternoon, I did something small that helped more than it should have. I opened a closet near the front hall and pulled out the box of old labels and auction tags that had been stuffed inside after the cancellation. They were harmless now, just paper and string, but seeing them still bothered me. I carried them to the trash, dropped them in, and tied the bag. Then I wiped down the entry table beneath the portrait, slow circles with a cloth, removing dust that did not belong to anyone's legacy. It was a simple job. It made order. I thought about Graham and Elena. They had come for their scheduled pickup day. Mr. Leland was there. Daniel's assistant was there. A checklist sat on the table. Items were confirmed. Signatures were collected. There were no arguments because there was nothing to argue with. The process had been built to withstand emotion. Graham barely looked at me. When he did, his eyes were tired. He said, "I didn't know." I nodded once. "I know." Elena stood near the door before she left, holding a small box of personal items, and said quietly, "I should have asked you real questions." I said, "You can start now, if you want." She didn't respond right away. She just nodded once and left. That was enough for me. Not closure, not redemption, just a small, realistic shift. Marisol moved out on the extended timeline we agreed to. Her attorney tried twice to renegotiate terms. Both times, the answer stayed the same. No sales, no exceptions, no blurred boundaries. When she finally left, she didn't ask to speak to me. She didn't leave a note. She didn't try to create a last scene. In a way, I respected that. It was the first time she had accepted a rule she didn't write. That evening, after the house was empty again, I walked room to room and turned off lights that had been left on. I checked doors. I checked windows. I locked up. Then I stood in the front hall under the portrait one more time and looked at the girl in the corner. Her expression still looked like a quiet smile, like she understood something early. Not that she would win, just that she would last. On the drive back, I thought about something Daniel had said during one of our calls. "Families like yours aren't rare," he'd said. "They're just private." He was right. A few days after Marisol signed the occupancy agreement, Daniel forwarded me another email chain from a new client. Not connected to my family, not connected to the estate. A retired woman had purchased her sister's home through a trust to prevent a predatory caregiver from selling everything out from under her. The caregiver was already calling auction companies, already moving quickly, already counting on confusion. I read it once and felt that familiar calm settle in. Same pattern, different address. I wrote Daniel back with one line. "Send her my number. I'll explain the steps." Because sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is not comfort. It's clarity. If you've been listening with me, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this calm corner of the internet grow. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read more of those than you might think. 2 popular stories will appear next, and I'll see you there.